Welcome to Entromy's Private Equity Impact Series, where we bring you real stories from the field that showcase how data, insight, and advisory experience converge to accelerate value creation with some of the largest private equity firms in the world. Today's conversation is about what happens when a high potential portfolio company hits an inflection point, not necessarily in its numbers, but in its leadership dynamics. Joining me is Martin Factor of Lodestone People Consulting to explore a powerful moment of insight. A talented CEO navigating the transition from managing operations to truly leading culture. This was not about a lack of data, but rather the synthesis of what data, leveraging Entromy's diagnostic platform to generate targeted hypotheses, test them against the company's unique context, and ultimately surface a deep tension between growth ambitions and organizational safety. In this case, the aha moment emerged not from charts and graphs, but from attribution, clear signals in the narrative that pointed to a performance ceiling unless trust, clarity, and leadership alignment were addressed head on. With Entromy enabling precise stakeholder reads and real-time cultural insight, Martin helped frame the client's challenge, define a clear change agenda, and guide the CEO through both internal expectations and investor realities. So if you're a consultant, operator, or investor looking to understand how modern organizational dynamics can deepen your influence and accelerate transformation, this conversation's for you. Let's jump in. Martin, how are you today?
I'm great, thank you.
I really appreciate your time and joining me, and I would love to maybe just dive right into the most impactful point. Was there a moment in this engagement when you realized that something really clicked, where maybe Entromy surfaced an insight that shifted your thinking or maybe the client's direction?
Thank you. The most important is really understanding what's really the root of what's going on. And the only way to do that is to get the context from the investors and then also estimate where's the target. I think of emergent targets as being what comes up through the inquiry, given the stakeholders, the context, where it goes up. That's what it is, right? The big aha was shifting from management to leadership with a CEO who is early in his tenure as a CEO. Maybe it was his first CEO job. And the investors spoke very highly of him. They said he was the kind of guy that we needed to control costs and just get the ship back on course as it was taking water. So you look at the situational need for the more immediate future, and his capability as a strong driver to do that. However, we know that driving for outcomes in the short term is not a sustainable proposition, right? It's not going to get you to the promised land, and it's not going to fulfill the truth of the value creation plan either. And so Entromy's data was very informative because it gave insights as to what were the key reality issues, somewhat attributed to him, given his tenure there was only less than a year. But seeing slippage in data over time, given this was the second time measurement happened, where he could actually take a pause to say, this is attributable to me. And so I think the aha was the insight regarding lighting a fire underneath people's feet is very different than lighting a fire within them. Leading from a strategic perspective is very different than managing at an operational level. And that transition point for him is the key opportunity. And so now he's interested in how he can level up.
How did you or the client really respond to this data? Was there a moment where you could say it was actually sinking in or it was starting to make a lot of sense? How did that moment of realization come to be?
It's just asking the why question. Okay, so firstly, the investors here had a preview where they got to consume the data and ponder the why question. Why is this the case? So the indications of loss of engagement and trust in leadership were pretty significant. And so why is that the case? And where are the attributions, right? So I think iterating through the hypotheses to really understand where's the root issue and how to address it. So there were two. One was his immaturity as an executive. The second was lack of leadership around him, forcing him into his backup mode, which is really one of execution and driving, not having the degrees of freedom that others might have with a more effective and intact leadership team. So it then provided some clear perspective for where the degrees of freedom, what are the messaging to him regarding expectations, and then what does he need to do in a way that really blends into his motivation, but also the organization's needs. So I think we were square and ready to engage him in a very meaningful way. The other thing is they were very proactive in sharing that this is a porous CEO. Meaning, when they've given him feedback before, he doesn't get defensive, he becomes curious and he wants to improve. And that was another key clue for engaging him in a way that was understanding the context, appreciating him, and then having him get involved in interpreting the data and making sense of it.
So, Martin, I was hoping we could maybe take a step back just for a minute. Could you briefly describe the client organization and what made this engagement unique and exciting? I know you've been a part of quite a few of these types of engagements over your tenured career, but what really stood out to you in this engagement that maybe you could share with our audience?
There's a passion for success at any phase of organization's life, right? So this is a small company with an addressable market and a unique value, and at a level of a product, right, a technology. So you're thinking about, well, there's a window of time, and there's a period that is the short and then the murky middle, and this is a critical moment for impact. Knowing that this is the frame, it's always exciting to think about what are the levers and what are the pitfalls at this critical moment in time. What Entromy's data allows us to do is to really isolate and pinpoint the key levers that will give the greatest amount of lift to get out of the pitfall, to address it, and get over the hump towards just to maximize the asset at the point in time. And these are human beings, they want to thrive. They want to be successful. Nobody wants to fail here.
And so in this particular engagement, Martin, can you describe the role you were playing and really what were you being asked to solve for?
So coming in was the contextualizer is the role. I think the drawing the so what from the data, the insights from the data is then linking it to my role as the change catalyst and the contextualizer. I also think of it as being the diplomatic agitator, where I'm not there to insult the insultants. I'm there to really help get the aha moments through healthy dose of humility. Lodestone's values: balance, credibility, humility, and aha. Those are three of our primary ones. But that's a critical role to play. To be credible in that capacity requires a curious mind and a investigative mind initially. And there's an invitation for collaboration to interrogate the data together, but also with some strong hypotheses. Think about Columbo's, like the investigators putting a finger on the temple and thinking, well, I've got a hunch that it might be this. And it's coming in with a perspective or point of view and with a willingness to shift and to understand, to continue to contextualize and iterate to the point of that emergent target really being the sweet spot where the minds converge and it's like, aha, this is it. And in this case, it didn't take long to get to that critical moment of insight, as well as what to do foundationally around two key priorities: rebuild trust and lead through vision.
So I want to follow up on those 2 points. What data or what sets of data in Entromy's findings helped you come to those 2 conclusions?
Well, there are two. You juxtapose the business imperatives of the value creation plan, the value creation levers. What do we need to really achieve here? Both growth, operational effectiveness, and people. Those typically are the 3 roots. So I think the other is the data of the reality of organizational health, which is basically employees actively disengaged and kind of leaving. There's no spirit of change or innovation because the foundation is very cracked. Foundationally, there were trust issues, trust in leadership, and actively disengaged people. So you've got the aspiration of vision, you've got the lack of engagement and lack of trust. So it's a tandem play. And there's a window of time for the CEO to actually make a difference because he still can repair through building trust, but at the same time, hold people to the vision of the value creation plan so they know what and why, they understand that they have a safe place to be. And when those two are really addressed through the CEOs, I guess the imperative for my role right now is to balance these two juxtaposing things. It becomes clear and it becomes challenging, but at least there's an alignment between him and the investors, him and the employees regarding what to do next. So some heavy lifting, but those were the key roots from the data.
So, Martin, I know your experience is quite vast. You've worked with a lot of executives. You've probably evaluated a number of different types of reports, both at Entromy and maybe other sorts of reports. I'm wondering if there were any surprises in the data. Were there things that maybe the client hadn't seen before and that you wanted to maybe present? I'm curious if there were any surprises in this engagement.
I think I don't know if surprises are the right words, but there's going to be noise and signal, just depending on many things, response rates, representation for certain categories. I don't think that the word surprise actually resonates with me in this case. I think there's a way to level up data to an order that is a little bit higher than the nit and the nat of any noise factor that is happening from some unreliability given sample size or relevance of the variable to the person's role. But we don't major on the minors. We got to find the core. And I don't think surprises happen, though, when you do what we do. What I love about Entromy is that there's a high degree of data curiosity to arrive at the integration of data given some strong hypotheses. It's not just a data dump. Then the partnership with Entromy is we get with your analysts and we parse it through to arrive at those denominators of truth, so to speak, hypotheses to test. So we don't just dump data. It comes in through an iterative process that is a balance of curiosity and engagement.
I'm wondering if we could take a moment and dive a little deeper on that topic, because there is a lot of data that we collect. There's a lot of data that we do as a company kind of work through and massage and synthesize and some of those things. I'm curious if you could help maybe articulate what was that prioritization process? Because ultimately, when you're executive facing, we want to move towards action items. We want to move towards recommended action items. How did that happen? How did that come to be?
Yeah, well, I love the way the data is represented and framed on the key facets. So for organizational health, there are key dimensions that you look at. Most often, the human capital dimensions are lower, given that's typical in contexts like this. And given immature human resource practices, some of the tensions and pressures that come with growth, markets for talent, the war for talent, yada, yada. However, there are higher order variables that involve clarity of vision and strategy, leadership, trust in leadership, that really are looking at leadership variables. Then there are simple hygiene factors regarding strategy and clarity of the robustness of that strategy. So it's kind of like a balance between the rational aspects of organizational strategy, leadership, and human engagement. And so if you come into those higher order variables and you look at relative ranking against the norm group or the reference group, you very quickly begin to see where are the key levers and what questions do we need to ask regarding why these data are showing the way they are. And then the attributions. The last review we had, there were multiple locations and 2 were driving down scores. We didn't want to then generalize to the broader gestalt that this is the systemic organizational issue, but really to clarify why in those locations are there these discrepancies, leading to even greater discernment as to what is driving what and what to do about it. So you've got multiple levels of inquiry to drive then hypotheses to show up with, because you got a consumer who doesn't have all the time in the world to make sense of all of these variables. They appreciate that you've taken time to level it up and analyze it to arrive at certain conclusions that they can then respond to. And they may have very different conclusions, and that's fine. That's why it needs to be an iterative and collaborative process. But the good news is that there's reliable data that is relevant to their value creation plan, that is right in front of us, the collective.
And so, Martin, when you're presenting to the executive and you're looking at the data and you're making these recommendations, what was the response? How did that CEO handle some of those suggestions and some of those recommended action items?
Well, in this case, very porous. Once again, I think the attitude of curiosity and inquiry and the framing, there's something to be said about being empathic towards the reality of a person who's showing up to do good work, just to recognize the challenge. What I loved about this context was the investors and I were very clear in recognizing his strengths and what he's doing really well. Keep in mind that this is a situation where you got to stop the bleeding or you got to stop the water from sinking the ship. And it takes quite a lot of stamina to come in that in your early days, weather the storm, and then stand on some level of a platform to then move forward. I think empathy for that reality, but still accountability for leadership. So I think he sensed the attitude as being one of let's collaborate around value creation, but also the transparency of him being on the hook and his accountability for it. And in his case, this is a person who's driven. He's also humble enough to take accountability. There are other instances where you're going to have very defensive and reactive CEOs, but then the tactics and the approaches are going to be different.
So I'm curious, Martin, if you could walk us through just for a moment, really when you were talking to the CEO and you were kind of presenting these next steps, who led that charge? And then kind of the next question is, how did whoever's leading the charge build internal alignment and then a sense of urgency around those action items?
Yeah. Well, the bottom line question, like any engagement with an executive, is the seeking their take forwards, and there's the pause before all is said and done. And it's simple as we've covered so much today. You've been active in your engagement here. What are a couple, three things that you're really pulling forward from this conversation? It's similar when we do coaching, when we give feedback after assessment, is we want to hear the pull forward, and that then becomes on the hook factor. We're not there to tell the person what they need to do and why. It just doesn't make sense. I think to get to that, there's been this iteration around the common couple, three themes that keep coming up, and then regarding that emergent target that keep coming up. And it's basically just having him frame. Now, the next steps were very much like, what are the next steps to do? In his case, it was working on his leadership, self-awareness, and repositioning his leadership through executive coaching. That was one. Committed to that, on the books for it. The next was build his team. The acquisition imperative, but also the intentionality of really stepping back to hire a couple key roles. The third was reclaim trust of the culture and start leading culture versus managing culture with some micro steps that are very common at the end of a survey, is just to get a response back to people, show up to get on the hook in a reliable way for thank you for the feedback, this is what we are going to do as a result, and make some commitments that are truly achievable. And those were the three that he resonated with and that he is now actioning as we speak.
Reflecting on this engagement, how would you describe Entromy's role in your toolkit?
Yeah. So this coincidence of aligning with Entromy, with Lodestone and our value proposition, I don't just think about as coincident. I think it's really well done given the thought leadership of your CEO, and our thought leaders regarding business impact and business outcomes, right? What we really like is that you have your diagnostics on the value creation levers. We call them business imperatives. These are the outcomes of all of this effort that have to do with tangible business results that then can be shifted and changed through leadership practices, solutions. That's what we do. What I like about Entromy is that we are able to frame the constructs of business outcomes and provide reliable measures around all the ingredients, all the levers that relate to those business outcomes, and measure along the way. Longer hold periods, life cycles, checkpoints around data, and making the right connections and attributions. So for example, coming back to the growth and operational drivers and then the talent drivers, we're able to give a baseline of health regarding at the macro level, how well is this organization balanced across those key drivers that then become very clear regarding the diagnostics for where's the low-hanging fruit opportunistically, where are the more systemic challenges that need to be factored in to address those, and how do we know we're being successful? The other thing is we know it takes a team, and we know it's not just one leader who's going to do this. We have a framework called TeamBidder, which is EBITDA with TAM. It's a trademark around the impact of our consulting, where we say the performance of the team is what we really want to affect. How we do it through our solutions will depend. What Entromy gives us are data points that prove the impact of making critical moves and being able to then judge the efficacy of those. For example, if there's a chief commercial officer and a chief revenue officer who are failing miserably, and you got a growth driver that is faulting, you got attributions of all these in the data that might have to do with engagement of the people in their functional departments, lack of alignment that they have. And so you're able to say, okay, so if we just address a couple of these roles, you're going to see some outcomes that are going to shift. The CEO then, the captain of his ship, are able to then say, okay, listen, let's measure again at a pulse, which is offered, and let's see if those actions really impacted the mid-range outcomes we're looking for. And I can go on and on. Another indication might be the talent one, the business imperative about capabilities. We know longer hold periods require a greater investment in human capital. There's a lot of data around where can you actually make a big difference if you're going to try and invest some resources on the talent game plan and measure those. There's also 360 measurement that are included in your suite that give feedback to leaders around their role. So the toolkit is big enough and reliable enough for us to draw into prove impact, with the mindset that is common that we hold is that we're looking for business outcomes and relevance and the so what. The data is reliable enough to give us indications that we can then navigate and then prove impact.
So, Martin, I was hoping that maybe I could get a quote from you, and you just did a very eloquent job of explaining how Entromy would be utilized in a toolkit. I'm wondering if you could break it down into a single benefit. What would be the biggest benefit that Entromy with Lodestone delivered to this CEO?
It is the it factor. It implies quite a bit of discernment and rooting it out. So what is it? Prioritization that comes from data gives the it, right? And I think the bottom line is what it is team impact. Once again, within TeamBidder is the letter IT, which is the it. And it does take a team to effectuate and address the market. And we are able to get at it through reliable measurement. So it's not just conceptual, but it's rooted, and you're balancing strategy with outcome, and there's a proof point for it. Leaders don't have a lot of attention to give if you can't really make it measurable. And so having proof of impact for it through data that is reliable and that can be parsed in ways that really answer your questions is just essential to have.
Martin, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate the ongoing partnership that we've been building at Lodestone with Entromy, and your insights are just so valuable in what we do and the impact that both of our firms aim to deliver. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Matt.